The day my son Lucas called my life a burden, I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. We were at my house, gathered for our Sunday dinner, but it felt more like a court hearing. Lucas, my oldest, sat across from me, and his wife Samantha kept giving me these tight little smiles. My other children, Emily and Daniel, just watched, quiet as mice. I had spent all day making roast chicken, but it was like they were tasting ashes. "Mum, we're just worried about you," Lucas said, but his voice was hard. "Living here all alone, it's not safe. The house is too big for you." I looked at him. "Lucas, I'm fine. The house is my home. Your father built it with his own 2 hands." Samantha snorted, and a few neighbours walking by outside stopped to glance at our open window. "It's not just the house, Margot," she said, leaning in like she was telling a secret. "It's the money. We need to be sensible about your future. You're not getting any younger, are you?" My heart felt like it was shrinking in my chest. They talked about me like I wasn't even there. Frugal, they called me. It was just a fancy word for poor. I felt my cheeks get hot. I wanted to tell them I had everything I needed. But there was a secret, a promise I had made to Charles, my late husband, that I couldn't share. What would they do if they knew the truth about the money? Charles was a great man. He could build anything with his hands, and everyone in town knew his work. He built our home, and he built a business that was the talk of the town. But his greatest gift wasn't to me or the children. It was to the town. One night, right before he passed, he sat me down in this very living room. He held my hands, his strong rough from all his work. "Margot," he said, his voice soft, "my one true wish is for you to find your strength. I've left you something special, a hidden trust. It's not about the money, Margot, it's about you. It's about freedom." I didn't understand him then. I was too busy being his wife, taking care of the kids, making sure everything was perfect. But he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. He knew my life was defined by my obedience. He knew I would give up everything for my children. "Don't tell them, Margot," he whispered, his eyes looking right into my soul. "Not yet." I still remember the feeling of his hand on my cheek, how his eyes held a secret I didn't yet understand. He had left me a gift, but what would I do with it? Could I keep his secret safe? I was in the kitchen washing dishes from that terrible dinner when I heard Lucas on the phone. He thought I'd gone to bed, but I was just putting away the last of the leftovers. He was speaking in a low voice, but I could hear every word. "Yeah, Mark, she's old. She's not thinking straight," he said into the phone. "We're just going to cash out the house and get Margot settled somewhere else." He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "She won't even know what hit her. She's got no use for this big place anyway." My hands stopped scrubbing the plate. My heart started pounding like a drum. Lucas was talking about my home, the home his father built, like it was an old car to be sold for parts. He was talking about me like I was a thing, a problem to be solved. He wasn't thinking about my feelings, my memories, or what I wanted. He was thinking about money. A cold feeling spread through me, like I had been dunked in an ice bath. They weren't just being condescending, they were planning to take everything. Would they really do this? Would they really sell my home right out from under me? I was still in the kitchen, feeling shaky from what I'd heard my son Lucas say. Then I heard my daughter Eleanor on the phone. She was talking to my youngest son, Ben. I crept closer to the living room door, just enough to listen. My own children. What else were they saying? "She's a burden, Ben," Eleanor said. Her voice was sharp, not at all like the sweet girl I raised. "Lucas and I can't keep carrying her forever." My heart felt like it was breaking into a million little pieces. They were my babies. I carried them for 9 months each. I stayed up all night when they were sick. And now I was a burden. Ben mumbled something, and Eleanor's voice got louder. "A nice facility. They have nurses and games. She'll be fine. It's what's best for everyone." My breath caught in my throat. A facility. They wanted to put me in a nursing home. It wasn't about my safety or my happiness. It was about their relief. The words hit me hard, one after another, like someone was throwing stones at me. They weren't just thinking about selling my house. They were planning to get rid of me. I felt a new fire growing in my belly. My pain was turning into a burning hot anger. They had no idea what I was capable of. Did they really think I was that helpless? That night, I couldn't sleep. The words burden and facility kept running through my head. I went to Charles's old study. It felt like he was still in the room with me. The air smelled of old paper and his favourite pipe tobacco. I sat at his big oak desk, surrounded by the blueprints he drew for all the houses he built in town. I started looking through his things. I found a hidden folder tucked behind a stack of papers. Inside there were legal documents. I looked at the names. Evermore Holdings, Charles's company. I read the words carefully, my finger tracing them. Margot Reynolds, sole controller, majority shares. My hands started to shake. The company wasn't just his, it was mine. All this time, they thought I was a poor old widow. They thought I had nothing. But the key to the kingdom, the thing they really wanted, was in my hands all along. Charles had left it for me. He knew. He knew they would try to take everything. He wanted me to be strong. The company, the money, it was all mine. What would my children do when they found out I held all the power? The next morning I made myself a cup of tea. My hands were steady now. I was a different woman. Lucas called, all cheerful. "Just checking in, Mum," he said. He sounded so fake. "Lucas," I said, my voice calm. "Who's this real estate agent you were talking about?" There was a long silence. He cleared his throat. "Oh, that. We were just getting an appraisal for insurance, Mum. Nothing to worry about. We're just looking out for you." He lied so easily, so smoothly. He looked me in the eye and told a lie like it was the gospel truth. I didn't say a word. I just listened. "Okay, dear," I said, and hung up the phone. I smiled, a small smile to myself. He thought he was so smart. He thought he was in control, but he had no idea what I knew. I wasn't a burden. I was a force. A quiet one, but a force all the same. I walked back into Charles's study, my head held high. I found the number for my husband's old lawyer, Mr. Thompson. The time for being cared for was over. My journey to freedom was about to begin. Would I be able to keep up this strong face, or would they see right through me? I went to my husband Charles's old lawyer, Mr. Arthur Vance's office. It was a fancy place downtown, smelling of leather and old books. Mr. Vance was a stern man, with a face like a bulldog, but his eyes were kind. He was a close friend of Charles's. "Margot," he said, and he looked surprised to see me there. "It's about time. Charles always said you'd be here one day." I laid the folder with the legal papers on his desk. He opened it, looked at the documents, and a small smile touched his face. He leaned back in his big chair. "Margot, what you have here is not just a company. It's the key to this whole city's future. You control Evermore Holdings. That means you own the biggest construction company around, the one that builds the roads and the shopping centres and the neighbourhoods. You control the company, Margot. You have the final say on everything." My head was spinning. All this time, I thought I had a little bit of money set aside. I had no idea. Charles had given me so much more. He had given me a real power. It was like he was still looking out for me, even from the grave. What would my children do when they found out their helpless mother was a business tycoon? I started small. I wasn't going to just jump out and show my hand. I needed to learn the rules of this new game first. So I spent a lot of time with Mr. Vance. He taught me about permits and building codes. He showed me how the town worked and how my husband's company made it all happen. One day, I saw a notice for a small new construction site on the other side of town. It was owned by one of my husband's old rivals. The permit to start building was sitting on my desk. It was just a little thing, No one would notice if it was a bit late. I picked up the phone. I called the city office. "This is Margot Reynolds from Evermore Holdings," I said, my voice shaking a little. "I'm calling about the permit for the new site on Oak Street. I need you to delay it for a little while." Just like that, it was done. No one would know it was me. Not my children, Lucas, Eleanor, or Ben. Not the other builders, not anyone. It was a secret I held all by myself. But how long could I keep my power hidden? A few days later, my son Lucas called me and he was so mad. He didn't even say hello first. "Mum, you won't believe this," he said. "That new project we were talking about is stuck. They're blaming it on bureaucratic red tape. Can you believe it?" He was talking about the site I had delayed. He thought it was just a problem with the city, something out of our control. My daughter, Eleanor, was on the phone with me a few minutes later, complaining about the same thing. "It's a huge mess, Mom," she said. "The whole thing is on hold." I listened to them, my children who wanted to put me in a home and take my house. I didn't say a word. I just smiled to myself, a small, knowing smile they couldn't see. For the first time in a long time, I felt powerful. They thought I was a burden, but I had their whole world in my hands, and they didn't even know it. How much longer could I watch them struggle before I finally showed them what I could do? I was in my living room watering my plants. It was a peaceful afternoon until the front door burst open. My son Lucas and my daughter Eleanor walked in, not even bothering to knock. My youngest son Ben was with them too. They looked angry. Lucas was holding a big stack of papers. He put them on my coffee table, right on top of my knitting. "Mum, we've had enough of this," he said, his voice hard. "This whole thing is dragging on. We need you to sign these." I looked at the papers. The words were big and scary. Power of attorney. Consent to sell property. They were trying to get me to give them all my power to let them sell my home. They wanted to make me a nobody, just a signature on a line. "What are these?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "They're for your own good, Mum," Eleanor said, trying to sound sweet. "Just sign them. It will make everything easier for all of us." They were treating me like a child who had to be told what to do. My heart ached, but I didn't want to cry. I had to be strong. What would happen if I didn't sign? "I won't sign them," I said. My voice was steady this time. The children stared at me, their faces full of surprise. They were used to me saying yes to being quiet and doing what they told me. Lucas's face went red. The nice boy I knew was gone, and in his place was a stranger full of rage. "Mom, don't be irrational," he yelled. "This is for our well-being. We have to think about our families now." His voice was so loud it made my ears ring. Eleanor started to cry. "We're just trying to help you," she wailed. Ben stood in the corner, looking at the floor. The masks of civility they wore had completely fallen off. They weren't concerned, loving children. They were greedy strangers, trying to take what wasn't theirs. "You're being difficult, Mom," Lucas said, his voice low and dangerous now. "Just sign the papers. Don't make this harder than it has to be." The tension in the room was so thick you could almost taste it. This wasn't a family meeting anymore. This was a battle. How far were they willing to go to get what they wanted? I looked at the papers again, at the lies they wanted me to sign. I looked at their angry, desperate faces, and I knew it was time. Time for them to see just a tiny bit of the truth. I put my teacup down, nice and slow. "I remember your father," I said, my voice soft. "He was so proud of Evermore Holdings. He always said the shares were special. I just want to make sure everything is in order, that's all." Lucas's face froze. Eleanor stopped crying. Ben looked up from the floor, his eyes wide. My children, my beautiful children, were looking at me with a new look I had never seen before. A look of fear. They knew their father had a lot of secrets, and now they knew I might have one of them too. "What about the shares, Mom?" Lucas asked, but his voice wasn't hard anymore. It was shaky. The power had changed hands. The first act of war was over. I had dropped a hint, and now they knew I was a player in this game, not a pawn. What would they do next? After I dropped the hint about the company shares, my children were like a hive of angry bees. They were buzzing and frantic. My son, Lucas, called me, but not to apologize. He called to ask questions. "Mum, what did you mean about the shares?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the panic in his voice. "We're just trying to get a handle on your finances." I didn't answer. I just told him I had a headache and had to go. They had no idea I was watching their every move. Through my husband Charles's old lawyer, Arthur Vance, I learned they tried to look at the company's records. They thought they could just walk in and see everything, but they couldn't. I had already put a temporary block on the accounts. They couldn't see a single thing. I smiled to myself, knowing they were scrambling. They were calling their own lawyers, trying to figure out what was happening. It was funny, really. Just a week ago, they thought I was a burden, a little old lady who didn't know anything. Now they were running around, scared of me. What would they do when they found out what I was doing next? I didn't wait long. I had to protect myself and my husband's legacy. So I told Arthur Vance to do it. He filed a lawsuit. It wasn't just to get back at them. It was to stop them from ever trying to take my home again. The lawsuit said they were trying to trick me out of my money and my house. It was called fraud and elder abuse. The papers were delivered to each of their homes: my son Lucas, my daughter Eleanor, and my youngest son Ben. I imagined the look on their faces when the mailman handed them a big envelope with my name on it, Margot Reynolds. I bet they were shocked. I bet their hearts dropped to their stomachs. This wasn't a family argument anymore. This was a legal fight, a real war. They had been planning to put me in a home. Now I was taking them to court. They had tried to get me to sign away my life, but I was fighting back. Was this the right thing to do to my own children? The courtroom was big and scary, with high ceilings and dark wood. But I wasn't afraid. I wore my favourite blue dress, the one Charles always loved. I sat at one of the long tables, with Arthur Vance beside me. My children, Lucas, Eleanor, and Ben, sat across the room. They looked nervous and jumpy. They kept whispering to their lawyers. I sat there, calm and quiet, like I was in church. This was a new me. The old me, the one who was always so quiet and obedient, was gone. The new me was strong. My children looked at me, and their eyes were filled with a mix of anger and fear. They had never seen me like this before. The judge talked and the lawyers talked, and I just sat and listened. This was my life now, a public battle with my own children, and it felt strange. It was sad, of course, but it was also freeing. I was fighting for myself for the first time in my life. I was no longer a burden. I was a person, a woman with power. But how much would this cost me in the end? The courtroom battle was just the beginning. A few days later, a nice young woman with a microphone showed up on my front lawn. She was a reporter named Sarah Jennings, from the local news. She had a kind face, but her eyes were full of questions. She wanted to know about me, about my husband Charles, and about the lawsuit with my children. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, holding her microphone up, "is it true you're suing your own children?" I didn't answer. I just told her I had no comment and went back inside. But the next day I saw her on the news talking about the lawsuit. The story was about a family, a widow, and a big construction company. She wasn't just reporting on the lawsuit. She was digging into my whole life. I knew she'd find out about Evermore Holdings soon. She would learn about my husband's business and my secret ownership. The secret I had kept for so long was about to come out. How could I keep my family business out of the public eye? We were back in a quiet room at the courthouse. It was a deposition, where lawyers ask questions and everything gets written down. Lucas, Eleanor, and Ben were there with their lawyers. They looked angry and tired. My lawyer, Arthur Vance, stood up. He looked at me, gave me a small nod, and then looked at my children. "We have a piece of evidence," he said. He had a recording of the night I heard them in the kitchen. The night they called me a burden and talked about putting me in a facility. He played the recording for everyone in the room. I sat there, listening to my own children's voices. "She's a burden," I heard Eleanor say. "We're going to cash out the house and get Margot settled," I heard Lucas say. My children's faces turned white as a sheet. The words they thought were private were now out in the open. They were written down in the court record for everyone to see. Their betrayal was no longer a private secret between us. It was a public fact. How could we ever go back to being a family after this? I was sitting in my living room, the same one where they had betrayed me, drinking a cup of tea. The TV was on, and I saw a picture of my house. Then a picture of Lucas, Eleanor, and Ben flashed on the screen. The reporter, Sarah Jennings, was standing in front of the courthouse. The headline on the screen was big and bright. "Family Feud. Widow sues children over construction empire." My private fight was now a public spectacle. The whole town was watching. My neighbours, people I knew from the grocery store, and people from church were all seeing our family problems on the news. I had buried my shame a long time ago, but now it was all out there. The quiet life I had lived was over. I was no longer just Margot Reynolds, the quiet widow. I was a person with a lawsuit, a family secret, and a huge company. My children had wanted to get rid of me, but now I was famous. The power had changed hands again. The question was, what was I going to do with this new, very public power? The news story hit our little town like a lightning strike. Suddenly, I wasn't just the quiet widow who lived in the big house on the hill. I was a local celebrity. When I went to the grocery store, people didn't just nod at me. They whispered and stared. I heard people talking about me and my children, Lucas, Eleanor, and Ben. They used to feel sorry for me, but now they were just curious. The same people who used to admire my children were now giving them dirty looks. I heard a woman in the bakery say, "Can you believe what those kids are doing to their mother?" My children had to face the same public shame they tried to put on me. They were used to being seen as a perfect family, but now their dirty laundry was flapping in the wind for everyone to see. The tables had completely turned. I wasn't just fighting them in court anymore. I was winning the battle for public opinion. But what would this fame cost me? It was time to make a big move. I had learned from my lawyer, Arthur Vance, that Lucas was in charge of a big new project for my husband's company, Evermore Holdings. It was a shopping centre that was costing a lot of money and wasn't going well. Lucas was making a mess of it. I told Arthur to use my power as the company's owner to put an immediate stop to it. I didn't care about the money. I cared about the message. My message was clear. I was in charge now, and my son had been a bad leader. When the news came out that the multi-million-dollar project had been stopped, it sent shockwaves through the city. Everyone knew what a big deal this was. Lucas called me, his voice shaking with pure rage. "You did this," he screamed. "Why would you do this? Do you know how much this is going to cost?" "I'm protecting my investment," I said, my voice calm as can be. He had no idea how powerful I had become. The power was mine, and I was going to use it. But what would he do now that I had stopped his biggest project? My children, Lucas and Eleanor, were desperate. So they went on a local talk show. They sat on the bright couches, looking like they were about to cry. Lucas said, "Our mother is not well. She's being taken advantage of by a greedy lawyer. We're just trying to protect her." Eleanor said, "She's not the woman we know. She's changed." They tried to make me sound crazy, like I was just a senile old woman trying to hurt them. But the people watching didn't believe them. The public response was terrible for them. The people on the talk show's social media all sided with me. They said my children were just trying to get what wasn't theirs. They called them selfish. I sat at home, watching them lie to the whole world. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The public already knew the truth. My private humiliation was a public spectacle, but now the humiliation was theirs. They thought they could win with words, but I had power. The court of public opinion had decided in my favour, but was that enough to win the war? The local reporter, Sarah Jennings, was still looking for a bigger story. So my lawyer, Arthur Vance, gave it to her. He gave her a stack of papers that showed how my children, Lucas, Eleanor, and Ben, had been spending my money. They had been taking money from my trust fund, a trust fund they didn't even know was mine, to pay for fancy cars, big vacations and expensive clothes. The headlines the next day were terrible for them. The story showed the world that they weren't worried about my health. They were just taking my money. The image they had tried to build of caring children who were just looking out for their mother was completely shattered. They thought they could trick everyone, but the truth was finally out. Now everyone knew they were greedy and selfish. I had fought them in court, I had defeated them in public opinion, and now I had exposed their lies. What more could I do? The last day of the trial was quiet. The judge looked at me, at my children, and then at a very old piece of paper. It was my late husband Charles's will, the one he had left with Arthur Vance years ago. The judge read it out loud. He said my husband left me with everything, all of the company, and full control over all the money. Then he said the most important part. He said that if any of the children ever tried to challenge me or take control of the company, they would lose everything. They would get no inheritance, nothing. All their money, their trust fund, all gone. The room was silent. My children's faces went white. They had been so greedy for so long, and now they had nothing. All their anger and their lies had led them to this moment. They wanted to put me in a home and take my house. Now they were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The final blow had been dealt, and I didn't even have to say a word. Did they finally learn their lesson? The judge ruled in my favour. He said that I, Margot Reynolds, was the rightful owner of Evermore Holdings. He said that my children had been unfair and opportunistic. It was a decisive victory. My fight was over. As I walked out of the courtroom, a strange thing happened. The reporters who had been chasing me for days now ignored me completely. They swarmed around Lucas, Eleanor and Ben. They asked them how they felt and what they would do now that they had nothing. I watched from a distance as my children, who had been so sure of themselves, had to face the cameras and the public without the money they so desperately wanted. They were finally exposed for who they truly were. I got in my car and drove home. I was finally free. I had my home, my power, and my peace. But I was alone. My children, my family, were no longer a part of my life. I had won the battle, but had I lost the war? After the courtroom, I went home and rested. For 2 weeks, I didn't answer my phone and I didn't turn on the news. The world thought I had disappeared. My children, Lucas, Eleanor and Ben, had no idea what I was doing. They were used to me being a part of their world, a person they could control. But now, with my silence, I held all the power. My quiet was a big noise to them. They were scrambling, trying to figure out what I would do next. I knew they were whispering, scheming. They couldn't accept that they had lost. Lucas probably wanted to find a way to get back at me. Eleanor was most likely crying to her husband. Ben, I'm sure, was just scared. I had won the battle, but the war was still going on in their minds. They couldn't stand the thought of me, their Margot, with so much power. What would they do without my money and my house to fight over? I was on my way to a new kind of freedom. I didn't want my money to just sit there. I wanted it to mean something. I had Arthur Vance help me. We started buying up houses. Not fancy houses, but little ones that had been taken away from women like me. Women who had been pushed aside by their own families. I found a woman named Helen, whose children had taken her money and left her to fend for herself. Another, Susan, was a widow like me, and her house was being foreclosed. I bought their homes. I didn't want any of their money. I just wanted to give them a safe place to live, a place to call their own. I had a little group of women now. We would sit and talk and knit and drink coffee. We were a small private collective. We were a new family. I had everything I had ever wanted, a purpose. Was this what my husband Charles had wanted me to do all along? It didn't take long for my children to find out. I heard they were on a frantic search, trying to figure out where my money was going. They were horrified. They had lost everything, but they had expected me to just sit on my money like a dragon on a pile of gold. They never thought I would do something useful with it. They were furious that I was spending the money they felt was owed to them on other people. The truth of my power finally became real to them. It wasn't just about a company or a lawsuit. It was about a new legacy, a new life I was building without them. They finally understood. The money wasn't a punishment for them. It was a tool for me. And I was using it to build a new world. A world where I was strong and where other women could be strong too. My children had wanted to destroy me, but instead, they helped me become a person I never knew I could be. I wasn't the quiet widow anymore. I was a force for good. They had tried to take my family from me, but I had gone out and built a new one. Did they regret what they had done? My son, Lucas, and my other children couldn't stand it. The money was gone, their fame was gone. They had nothing. Lucas needed money fast. He went to a man he thought was a simple contractor, someone who could help him mess with my new projects. But the man wasn't just a contractor. He was a very bad man. He worked for a scary group of criminals. Lucas went to him and said, "I need you to cause some problems for my mother's projects. Make them slow down. Make them cost her a lot of money." He didn't know who he was talking to. He was so desperate he didn't even care. All he wanted was to hurt me, to stop me from building my new life. He wanted to get revenge. He thought he was being smart, but he was playing a dangerous game. My children had been selfish and greedy, but now they were getting into something they didn't understand. What would this man do to them? My lawyer, Arthur Vance, came to my house one afternoon. He looked so sad. "Margot," he said, his voice quiet, "I have some bad news. I found out what your children are doing." He told me about Lucas and his plan to sabotage my projects. He told me about the bad man he was working with. I had been prepared for their greed. I had been ready for their lies and their anger. But this was a new kind of pain. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about hurting me, destroying the new life I was building. This was about revenge. They wanted to hurt me, not just take from me. It made my heart feel heavy, a kind of sadness I wasn't ready for. I had won the war, but it had made them into people I didn't even know. They had become strangers, cold and hateful. What could I do to protect them from the bad people they were dealing with? I was getting ready to tell the whole town about my new foundation, the one where I would help other women. I was going to have a party and a big announcement, but as I was leaving my house, I saw a man across the street. He had a camera with a long lens. He was taking my picture. Then a few days later, I saw him at the grocery store. He was pretending to look at vegetables, but I knew he was watching me. Arthur Vance found out he was a private investigator, a spy. He was hired by the same bad people Lucas was talking to. I was no longer just Margot Reynolds, the widow. I was a target. My fight for revenge had turned into a real danger. It was no longer just about hurting my children's feelings. It was about my safety. They had put me in danger. What would these criminals do to get what they wanted? After the media attention and the new danger, I felt like I needed some peace. My son Lucas called me. "Mum," he said. His voice was sweet, too sweet. "I'm so sorry. Can we talk? We miss you so much." He was a good liar. I knew he was just trying to get close to me, so he could find a way to get back what he thought was his. Eleanor sent a text saying, "Please, Mum, let's fix this." I didn't fall for it. My heart ached, but I knew what they were doing. They were trying to trick me, to get me to lower my guard. I told them, "I will consider speaking with you once you have genuinely changed." The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. I knew my words had hit them hard. They were not used to me talking back. They were used to me being obedient. They were still not ready to accept that I had changed. They still saw me as their mother, a woman they could control. They didn't see the queen they had created. Would they ever change? Or would they just get more desperate? One afternoon, I was having a cup of tea with one of the women from my new family, Joan. She was a kind, quiet woman. She had been a teacher for 40 years before her son and his wife had tricked her into giving them all her money. She had lost her house, her savings, everything. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. My children said they were just looking out for me, she said. They said it was for my own good. Her story sounded so much like mine. Her children's words were the same words my children, Lucas, Eleanor, and Ben, had used on me. The pain I had felt wasn't just my pain. It was a pain that so many women felt. I had thought my fight was for me and Charles's legacy, but it was for something much bigger. My revenge wasn't just for myself. It was for all the women who had been treated like burdens. I had the power to help them, to give them a second chance. I had a new purpose. Could my revenge really become a legacy of hope? My children had been watching me, even though I was being careful. They saw me with Joan and the other women. They thought my kindness was a weakness. They thought they could use it against me. My son Lucas went back to that bad man. He told him about my new foundation and my big party. They made a plan. They were going to expose my corruption at the party. They were going to make me look like a bad person, an old woman who was trying to hurt her family. They wanted to frame me for a crime. I was getting ready for the party. My hair was done, and I was wearing a beautiful dress. But I knew what they were planning. They were going to try to ruin me in front of everyone I knew. They were going to use my new legacy to tear me down. They had gone from trying to take my money to trying to destroy my life. The final battle was coming, but this time it was on my terms. Would I be able to stop them, or would they finally get their wish? I was at my lawyer's office, Arthur Vance's office. He looked worried, more worried than I had ever seen him. He had found out the whole plan. The bad people my son Lucas was working with were going to a party I was holding for my new foundation. They had fake documents and a man who was going to lie, a man they paid to say I was a criminal. He was going to say I was hiding money and doing bad things with the company my husband Charles built. They were going to make it look like I was the bad person. My children, Lucas, Eleanor, and Ben, were going to be there, and they would point the finger at me. My own children were going to watch me be shamed in public. My heart ached, not for myself, but for the people my children had become. They were so desperate to hurt me that they would work with dangerous people. What more could they do to hurt me? I sat in my chair at Arthur's office, and a thought came to me. I couldn't just stand there and let them lie about me. I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't the quiet widow who would just take it. I had to fight back. Arthur, I said, we can't just stop them from showing the fake documents. We have to show everyone that they are lying. We have to go on the offensive. He looked at me, his eyes wide. Margot, he said, this is dangerous. These are not good people. But I knew what I had to do. They wanted to hurt me? Fine. I would show them what real power was. I would use the party to show the world that my children were working with criminals. The gala wasn't just going to be about my foundation. It was going to be about the truth. I had to expose my children's evil. I had to do it to protect myself, but also to protect them. But what would happen if my plan went wrong? The night before my party, I was sitting in my living room drinking a cup of tea. My phone buzzed. It was a text message from a number I didn't know. I opened it and it said, "We know what you're doing. Back down now or suffer the consequences." My blood ran cold. It wasn't my children, Lucas, Eleanor, or Ben. It was the bad people they were working with. They were watching me. They were a real danger, not just angry children. I had to protect myself and my new family. But I wasn't afraid. I had come too far. I had been a quiet widow for too long. I was a fighter now. The next day I was going to face them all, my children and their criminal friends. Would I be able to stand strong against all of them? The gala was held in the biggest hall in town. It was so beautiful. Lights twinkled everywhere, and people were dressed in their best clothes. It was for my new foundation, the House of Second Chances. It was my way of helping other women who had been through what I went through. I was on the stage wearing a pretty blue dress. I felt so proud. The people I was helping, women like Joan, were all there smiling. Then I saw them. My children, Lucas, Eleanor and Ben, were standing in the back. They looked uncomfortable and out of place, like they were at a party they didn't want to be at. Lucas kept looking at his phone. I knew what was coming. I knew they had a plan to ruin me. They were standing there waiting for me to fall, waiting for me to be humiliated in public. But I wasn't scared. I was a different woman now. I was strong. I had my new family with me. I had people who loved me for who I was, not for my money. Could my children ever see the true meaning of a family? Just as I was getting ready to speak, a man walked onto the stage. He was wearing a dark suit and had a cold look in his eyes. He wasn't invited. He was from that bad group of people my son Lucas was dealing with. He took the microphone from the host. "We have some important information about this foundation," he said, his voice loud and clear. "We have proof that Margot Reynolds is a fraud. She is a criminal who stole money from her own family." He held up some papers, the fake documents my children had given him. The room grew quiet. Everyone looked at me. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face calm. I was not going to let them see me sweat. I had prepared for this moment. All eyes were on me. The man thought he had me, but he had no idea what I was going to do next. Was he ready for the truth? The man on the stage had just called me a fraud. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I took a deep breath, walked over, and gently took the microphone from his hand. I didn't say anything about the fake papers. I didn't say anything about my children. Instead, I looked at all the faces in the crowd. "I know what it feels like to be a burden," I said, "to be worthless." I told them about the day my son, Lucas, called my life a burden, and my daughter, Eleanor, agreed. I told them how I felt small and how I was ready to give up. I told them about the shame I felt. The room was silent. I didn't talk about money. I talked about feelings. I talked about what it felt like to be treated like you didn't matter. I looked right at Lucas, Eleanor, and Ben, and I spoke from my heart. I had to show the world that the real burden was not an old woman's life, but her children's greed. What would they do now that I had shown their true colours to everyone in the room? I looked right at my children, Lucas, Eleanor, and Ben, standing in the back of the room. The man from the bad group was still on the stage, but the crowd was looking at me. "I want to talk to my children," I said into the microphone. I didn't yell. I spoke quietly, but my voice was strong. For years I was quiet. I let you talk about me. I let you think I was stupid. I let you call me a burden. I let you think I was helpless. I was so used to being quiet that I had forgotten how to speak up for myself. My children just stared at me. Their faces were pale. I told them about the time I overheard them talking, about the pain I felt. I told them about the shame. The shame wasn't just in front of the crowd, it was in front of my own children. I looked them right in the eye. "You made me feel so small," I said, "but that feeling is a heavy one. I don't carry that shame anymore, do you?" The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. My quiet words were louder than any shout. How would they ever get out of this mess? After I spoke, the man from the bad group tried to say something, but I put my hand up. "I'm not finished," I said. My lawyer, Arthur Vance, pressed a button. A giant screen came down behind me. On one side, there were pictures of my children's fancy cars, big houses, and expensive vacations. On the other side, there were pictures of the women I was helping. Women like Joan, standing next to me. The screen showed the cost of their houses and my new projects. "This is what they spent on themselves," I said, pointing to my children's side. "And this is what I am spending on others." I showed everyone the money they had been spending, money from my trust fund. My son Lucas and my daughter Eleanor had used my money to live a fancy life while planning to take my house and put me in a home. The truth was right there on the screen for everyone to see. The crowd gasped. The media was taking pictures like crazy. My private war was now completely public, and my children's secrets were out for all to see. They were no longer the golden children. They were the villains. What would they do now that they were fully exposed? After I showed everyone the truth, I stepped back from the microphone. I didn't have to say another word. Then, Joan, the woman I had helped, walked to the microphone. She was nervous, but her voice was strong. "My name is Joan," she said. "I'm a retired teacher. My family took everything from me. My son and his wife said they were just looking out for me. They left me with nothing." She told her story, and it was my story too. My children, Lucas, Eleanor and Ben, watched as a complete stranger told the story they had lived. Joan's words were like a punch to the gut. She spoke of her pain and her shame. "Margot saved me," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "She gave me a second chance." The crowd cheered. The man from the bad group, who had tried to lie, just walked off the stage. There was nothing he could do. The truth was standing right there in front of him. My revenge had turned into a new life, a new family. My fight was not for me anymore. It was for all the Joans in the world. What would my children do now that I had an army of women behind me? The gala was in a quiet, stunned state. My children, Lucas, Eleanor and Ben, were still standing in the back, their faces pale. The man from the bad group had slunk away, but I wasn't done yet. I looked at the crowd, and I looked at my children. My lawyer, Arthur Vance, and I had a final trick up our sleeves. We had listened to all their phone calls and conversations, and we had found out about their plan with the criminals. "I had a new kind of family to protect," I said, looking at the women who were with me. "And so I had to be smart. I pressed a button on a remote. A video came on the big screen. It was my children sitting in their car, talking. My son Lucas was talking about meeting the bad men. "She's a stubborn old woman," he said. Eleanor was telling him what to say. "She'll never see it coming," she said. Their faces, full of greed and hate, were huge on the screen. The room gasped. They were caught. They had used my money to try to hurt me, and now the whole world knew. What would they do now? They had no secrets left. The video ended, and the room was a storm of noise. People were talking, shouting, and a lot of them were crying. The media, the reporters, the guests, they were all captivated by the raw emotion and the truth. They rushed to get a picture of my children. My son Lucas was yelling at his lawyer. My daughter Eleanor was crying, but this time it wasn't a fake cry. It was real. Their reputation, the one they had worked so hard to build, was gone. It was shredded, just like the fake papers they tried to use on me. They were no longer the golden children. They were the villains of the story. I had won. But what would happen to them now that they had nothing? The man from the bad group, the one who tried to lie about me, was seen running out the back door. He knew he was caught. He knew my lawyer, Arthur Vance, would be calling the police. He was gone, and so were all my children's plans. My children, Lucas, Eleanor and Ben, were left alone in the middle of the room, exposed, with nothing. They had no money, no home to take from me, and no one to love them. They had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, they were the ones who were left with nothing. I had to choose. I could either forgive them and take them back, or I could leave them on their own, but they would always be my children. The pain of their betrayal will always be with me, but so will the strength I found in myself. My husband, Charles, wanted me to find my strength, and I did. My revenge was not about money. It was about me. It was about finding myself again. I looked at my children, Lucas, Eleanor and Ben, huddled in the corner of the room. They were sobbing, their faces red with shame. They had nothing left to take, no lies left to tell. My son Lucas looked up at me, but I didn't see the greedy man I knew. I just saw a scared little boy. My daughter Eleanor wasn't pretending to cry anymore. She was just crying. I felt no triumph, no happiness. I just felt a deep sadness, a pity for them. Their lives were so empty. They had nothing but their greed. I knew they were my children. They were my flesh and blood, but they were strangers to me now. I walked past them, out of the ballroom, without saying a word. I left them in their shame. They had lost everything, but it was because of their own choices. They had lost their mother and their inheritance, but they had also lost themselves. My heart ached, but I knew I had to let them go. I was no longer their mother. I was a woman on a new journey. Would they ever find their way back? The next day I went to my lawyer's office. Arthur Vance had a big smile on his face. "Margot," he said, "you did it. You showed them all. The syndicate, the bad people Lucas was working with, they're gone. They saw what you did at the gala and they backed off. They know you're not a woman to mess with." He was so proud of me. He said I had turned my pain into something good, a public good. He was amazed. "You took a bad situation and made it a force for change," he said. He told me the news was all over town and everyone was talking about my bravery. I had a new family now, the women I was helping. My life was no longer about my children. It was about me and my purpose. The quiet widow who had lost her husband had found her voice and her power. But a new question was in my mind. What would I do with all this power? The next morning I went to the cemetery. I had a bouquet of my husband, Charles's, favourite flowers, daisies. I sat on the grass in front of his tombstone. The sun was shining and the birds were singing. "Charles," I said, my voice soft. "I did it. I finally found my strength. You told me to. You left me the key to the kingdom. I was scared, but I used it. I'm no longer a burden. I shed that pain and I found a new purpose. I have a new family now, women who were like me, and I can help them." I told him about the gala, about my children's shame, about the new life I was building. I told him about all the things he had missed. I finally felt at peace. It was a full circle moment. The burden of my old life was gone. I had found my freedom. And with a smile, I knew my life was only just beginning. After the gala, I spent most of my time at the foundation, the House of Second Chances. It was a beautiful place, full of life and hope. I saw women like Joan, who had been hurt by their families, learning to smile again. We drank coffee and talked about everything. We shared our stories, our heartaches, and our dreams. I wasn't just helping them. They were helping me too. I was seeing the impact of my work. The houses I bought were now homes for women who needed them. The money my children Lucas, Eleanor, and Ben had been so greedy for was now a tool for good. I felt a deep, quiet joy, a feeling I hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't the joy of revenge, it was the joy of empowerment. I had taken my pain and turned it into a purpose. My husband, Charles, had wanted me to find my strength, and I had. I had found it in a way he couldn't have even imagined. I had found it by helping others. My life had a new meaning, a new mission. Would my children ever find their own purpose? One afternoon, a letter came in the mail. It had my son Lucas's handwriting on the envelope. I knew what it was. An apology. A plea for me to forgive him and give them back the money. I held it in my hand for a long time. I thought about the man who was my son, the boy I had raised. I thought about the day he had called my life a burden. I thought about the lawsuit, the public humiliation, and the gala. I knew that whatever he wrote in the letter, it wouldn't change anything. Their approval no longer mattered to me. Their opinions, their needs, their greed, all of it was just noise. Their power over me was gone. I put the letter in a drawer with my knitting and never opened it. It was a sign of my new freedom. I didn't need their forgiveness to be happy. I was already happy. I had a new family, a new purpose, and a new life. Their letter had no power over me. I was finally free. Was I a bad mother for not opening it? One day a new woman arrived at the foundation. She was quiet and broken, and she looked so alone. She had a small bag with her, and her eyes were full of shame. She told us that her family had left her with nothing. I looked at her, and I saw a younger version of myself. I saw the same fear and sadness in her eyes. It reminded me of when my daughter, Eleanor, had called me useless and the shame I had felt. I gave her a warm hug and a cup of tea. She smiled a small, tired smile. In that moment, I knew my work was just beginning. I had won my battle, but there were so many more women who needed help. My story wasn't just my own anymore. It was a story of hope for all of us. I had a purpose bigger than myself, bigger than revenge. I had a foundation, a new family, and a new life. And I knew my husband, Charles, would be so proud of me. I had finally found my voice, and I was ready to use it for good. The end of my old story was just the beginning of my new one. After the gala, my life wasn't just my own anymore. The local news story had gone international. My story, the one I told with my heart on my sleeve, was all over the world. People from different countries were talking about me. I, Margot Reynolds, the quiet widow, had become a symbol of resilience, a word I barely knew but had become. Women wrote to me from all over the country telling me their stories and saying that I had given them hope. The foundation, the House of Second Chances, was growing. We had so many people who wanted to help. My money, my husband, Charles's money, was doing so much good. It was not a revenge story anymore. It was an empowerment story. I had turned my pain into a force for good. I had gone from being a burden to a hero. But what would this new fame mean for me and my new family? I was in my husband Charles's study, sitting in his big chair. The room was so quiet, and I felt so peaceful. My phone rang. The number was blocked, so I didn't know who it was. I hesitated, but I answered. I had nothing to hide. A cold, distorted voice came through the phone. It was unsettling, like something from a scary movie. The voice said, "You made a name for yourself, Margot, but the city's contracts belong to us now." Then the line went dead. My heart started beating fast. I knew what it meant. The bad group, the syndicate my children, Lucas, Eleanor and Ben, had been working with, was just a small part of a bigger, darker world. My fight was not over. It had just begun. The people I was dealing with were not just my children anymore. They were dangerous. I was no longer a quiet widow seeking revenge. I was now a target. I met my lawyer, Arthur Vance, for dinner at a quiet restaurant. I told him about the phone call. I showed him the blocked number on my phone. His face went pale. He explained that the syndicate was just a small part of a huge, powerful international organization. "Margot," he said, his voice low, "they are much bigger than we thought. They want to control everything." He told me that my husband Charles had been fighting them for years, but he had never told me about it. My husband had been a hero all along, and I had no idea. I looked out the window at the city. My city. I had found my power, but it had led me to a new battle. I wasn't a burden. I was a force to be reckoned with. And I knew that my journey was far from over. My life was a story now, and I was ready for the next chapter.